They said the divorce was clean. That was the word the journalists used. Clean. As if love could be erased with signatures and a press release. 5 years of marriage. No heir. Mutual decision. That was all the world was given. But the truth, the kind that keeps you awake at night, never fits into headlines. If you're watching right now, maybe because the room feels too quiet, maybe because your heart still aches over something you never talk about, stay with this story. And if at any point it starts to feel like it's touching something familiar, do me a small favor, tap like, subscribe, and leave a comment. It tells stories like this that they're needed. And maybe, somehow, it tells you that you're not alone. Because this isn't just a billionaire story. It's about what happens when love is treated like a transaction and regret collects its interest. Now, let's continue. When Cedric Dominguez married Eleanor, he wasn't yet the man magazines would later call untouchable. He had ambition, yes. Hunger. Long nights and sharp edges. But he also had moments where he laughed without guarding it, where he reached for her hand in public without thinking twice. Eleanor met him before the empire had a name. She remembered the one-bedroom apartment where the heater worked only if you kicked it just right. She remembered folding his shirts at 2 in the morning while he slept for 4 hours before another meeting. She remembered believing quietly, fiercely, that loving him was enough. You don't have to wait up, Cedric used to tell her. She always did anyway. Not because she had to, but because she wanted to be the first face he saw when he came home. When he proposed, it wasn't extravagant. No cameras. No orchestra. Just him, nervous for once, holding a small velvet box and saying, "I don't want to build anything without you." She believed him. The wedding came later, once the money did. White flowers. Crystal glasses. His mother's approval measured and conditional. The vows were exchanged under chandeliers that cost more than Eleanor's childhood home. But Eleanor didn't care. She stood beside him, smiling, thinking, "This is us. This is enough." For a while, it was. The first time the word heir entered their marriage, it didn't come from Cedric. It came from his mother, Victoria Dominguez, spoken lightly over dinner like an afterthought. "Of course, the next step is children," she said, slicing her steak with precision. "The board will expect it." Eleanor froze for half a second before smiling politely. Cedric laughed it off. "We've got time." Victoria's eyes flicked to Eleanor's stomach, assessing, calculating. "Time is a luxury, dear. Not an entitlement." That night, Cedric pulled Eleanor close in bed and kissed her forehead. "She doesn't mean anything by it," he said. Eleanor nodded, even though something in her chest tightened. She wanted children. She always had. But she wanted love first. Peace. Safety. She didn't know then how quickly those things could become negotiable. The first year passed easily. The second brought questions. The third brought doctors' offices that smelled like antiseptic and hope that never quite settled. Tests. Silence. Eleanor sitting alone in waiting rooms while Cedric took calls in the hallway. "I'm sorry," he would say later. "It's just timing." By the 4th year, sympathy turned into impatience. Victoria stopped hiding it. "At your age," she said once, her voice smooth as glass, "I already had Cedric. Perhaps you should consider alternatives." Eleanor stared at her teacup. "Alternatives?" "Solutions," Victoria corrected. "Surrogacy. Or different arrangements." That night, Eleanor cried quietly in the bathroom so Cedric wouldn't hear. She never wanted to be a problem that needed solving. The miscarriages were never announced. The first one, Eleanor told Cedric with trembling hands. "I'm pregnant," she whispered, eyes shining. He hugged her, stunned. Hope cracked open something long sealed inside him. 3 weeks later, the hospital room was too white. Too quiet. "I'm sorry," the doctor said gently. Cedric held her hand, stiff, unsure what to say. "It's okay," Eleanor whispered, even though it wasn't. "We'll try again." They did. And again. And again. Each loss carved something out of her. Each time, Cedric grew a little more distant, not cruel, just gone. He stopped coming to appointments. stopped asking how she felt. He started asking different questions instead. Do you think maybe this just isn't going to happen for us? Eleanor looked at him, searching his face. Do you want it not to? He didn't answer. The conversation that changed everything happened by accident. Eleanor hadn't meant to hear it. She was walking past the study when she heard her name. She's not fit to raise the child, Victoria was saying, her voice sharp. Too fragile. Too emotional. Cedric sighed. Mother. I'm thinking of the future, Victoria snapped. If a child is born, the family will ensure proper guardianship. The name matters more than her feelings. Eleanor felt the floor tilt. Guardianship. Taken. She pressed her hand to her mouth, backing away silently, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might give her away. That night, Cedric asked her gently, if we do have a child, would you be open to help from my family? Eleanor studied his face. The man she loved. The man who didn't know what his silence had already cost her. What kind of help? She asked. He hesitated. That was answer enough. After that, something in Eleanor closed. She stopped pushing. Stopped hoping out loud. She smiled when required, nodded through dinners, absorbed whispers and sideways glances. Cedric mistook her silence for resignation. She's given up, he told his lawyer weeks later. I need someone who can give me a future. The divorce was swift. Public. Humiliating. Eleanor was painted as the woman who couldn't do the one thing expected of her. She signed the papers without argument. On the final day, Cedric asked her one question. Why didn't you fight? She looked at him, eyes calm, voice steady. Because love isn't something you win by force. He didn't understand. Not yet. When Eleanor walked away, she didn't take the money. She didn't take the house. She took only what she brought into the marriage and her dignity. The world moved on. Cedric remarried within a year. A younger woman named Sabrina. Elegant. Perfect for cameras. When the pregnancy was announced, applause echoed through every room he entered. And yet, at night, when the applause faded, the silence felt heavier than before. And somewhere else, far from the headlines, Eleanor was learning how to breathe again. Eleanor expected the quiet after the divorce to feel empty. She was wrong. It felt like relief, and that scared her at first. The small apartment she moved into didn't have marble counters or staff that avoided eye contact. It had creaky floors and a balcony barely big enough for 2 chairs. The first night she slept there, she woke up disoriented, reaching for a man who wasn't there. Then she realized something. Her chest didn't ache. No one expected anything from her in the morning. No calendar filled with appearances she had to smile through. No eyes scanning her body for proof she was enough. She sat on the edge of the bed and cried, not because she missed the life she lost, but because she finally understood how heavy it had been. Across the city, Cedric Dominguez stood in front of a mirror worth more than Eleanor's rent and adjusted his tie for the 5th time. Relax, his new wife, Sabrina said lightly, stepping behind him. They already love us. She said us easily. Confidently. Cedric forced a smile. Of course. The gala was flawless. Investors shook his hand. Cameras flashed. Someone congratulated him on the baby, already speaking of legacy as if it were a completed project. He nodded. Thanked them. Played his role. And yet, when a waiter passed by carrying champagne, Cedric's eyes followed him automatically, expecting to see Eleanor beside him, gently reminding him to eat, grounding him in a way no one else ever had. The realization came sharp and unwanted. She would have hated this dress rehearsal of happiness. Weeks passed. The pregnancy became a headline. His mother softened, triumphant in a way that made Cedric uncomfortable. You see, Victoria said over lunch. It was never impossible. Just misplaced. Cedric swallowed. Eleanor wasn't misplaced. Victoria arched a brow. History will decide that. But history had a cruel sense of timing. The first crack came quietly. A call from legal. A discrepancy in timelines. A private investigator's cautious tone. "We're not making accusations," the man said. "Just recommending verification." Cedric laughed it off at first. Denial was easier than suspicion. Until the doubts followed him home. He started noticing small things. Conversations that ended when he entered the room. Sabrina's irritation when he asked about appointments. The way she avoided eye contact when he spoke about the future. The night he finally asked outright, she snapped. "Why are you interrogating me?" she demanded. "Isn't this what you wanted?" He stared at her, realizing too late that he didn't know how to answer. Meanwhile, Eleanor was rediscovering herself in small, fragile ways. She took long walks without purpose. She read novels she'd abandoned years ago. She learned to cook meals meant only for her. And one evening, at a quiet bookstore cafe, she met someone who didn't know her name. "Is that any good?" the man asked, nodding at the book in her hands. She blinked, startled. "I don't know yet." He smiled. Not politely. Genuinely. That's usually the best kind. They talked about nothing important. Weather. Stories. The strange comfort of silence shared. When he asked her name, he didn't pause. Didn't calculate. And when he left, he didn't ask for anything. That night, Eleanor realized something else. Love didn't always arrive loudly. Cedric's world began to tilt. The test results came back late on a Thursday. Negative. He sat alone in his office, staring at the paper as if it might rearrange itself out of pity. When he confronted Sabrina, she didn't cry. She didn't deny it. She just said, "I needed security." The word hit him like a slap. Security. That was what he had taken from Eleanor and offered as if it were love. The divorce that followed was uglier. No press release softened this one. Victoria's silence was colder than rage. Investors whispered. Cedric found himself alone again, but this time, it wasn't clean. It was hollow. Weeks later, by chance, he saw Eleanor. She was laughing. Not carefully. Not performatively. Her hand rested on the arm of the man from the bookstore cafe. The sight stole his breath. She looked happy. Not relieved. Not surviving. Happy. Cedric stood frozen, unseen, as they walked past him into sunlight. In that moment, something finally broke. He understood. 5 years without an heir hadn't ruined him. Losing her had. Cedric didn't follow them. That was the first mercy he gave himself that day. He stayed where he was, standing on a sidewalk he'd passed 1,000 times before without ever seeing it. People moved around him, living their ordinary lives, and for the first time in years, none of them cared who he was. He went home alone. The penthouse felt larger than usual, like it had been hollowed out. The silence wasn't peaceful anymore. It echoed. Every surface reminded him of what he'd replaced instead of repaired. That night, he opened a drawer he hadn't touched since the divorce. Inside was a folded piece of paper Eleanor had left behind by accident. A grocery list. His favorite tea circled twice. A note in the margin. "Don't forget to rest." He sat on the floor with it in his hands and realized something brutal. She had been loving him even while he was planning to leave. Eleanor didn't know he'd seen her. She only knew that for the first time in a long while, she hadn't looked over her shoulder when she laughed. Daniel, the man from the cafe, never rushed her. He didn't pry. He noticed when she went quiet and didn't demand explanations. One evening, as they sat on her small balcony watching the city dim, he asked gently, "Do you ever miss the life you had?" She thought for a moment. "I miss who I was allowed to be before I learned I was replaceable." Daniel didn't respond right away. He reached for her hand, not possessively, not urgently. Just there. "You're not replaceable," he said. "You were just in the wrong place." The words settled into her slowly, like warmth. Days passed. Cedric tried distraction first. New projects. New cities. New people who spoke to him carefully, as if he might break. But distraction didn't erase memory. He started dreaming of Eleanor, not the way she looked at the end, but the way she used to fall asleep on his shoulder during late-night work calls, trusting him to wake her gently. One afternoon, Unable to sit with it anymore, he asked his assistant to find out where she was living. When the address came, he stared at it for a long time. Then he deleted the message. Some losses didn't belong to him anymore. Eleanor found out she was pregnant on a rainy Tuesday. The test sat on the bathroom sink while she paced the small room, heart racing, breath shallow. When she finally looked, her hands started shaking. She laughed first. Then she cried. When she told Daniel, she expected fear. Questions. Hesitation. Instead, he smiled in that quiet way of his and said, "Okay. We'll figure it out together." Together. The word felt like a promise that didn't demand proof. Cedric found out months later. A mutual acquaintance mentioned it casually, not knowing it would land like a verdict. "She seems really happy," the woman said. "Pregnant. Engaged, I think." Cedric nodded, polite, composed. That night, he poured a drink he didn't finish and stood at the window, watching a city that no longer felt like it belonged to him. He finally understood the truth he'd avoided for years. Eleanor hadn't failed him. He had failed her by listening to everyone but the one person who loved him without conditions. Eleanor planned a small wedding alongside Daniel. No press. No spectacle. Just laughter, soft music, and their love that didn't need witnesses to feel real. Cedric didn't go to Eleanor's wedding because he thought he deserved her back. He went because something wouldn't let him sleep anymore. It started as a detail that didn't fit. Sabrina, the woman who had claimed she was pregnant, the one who had shattered his second marriage, had disappeared too cleanly. No lawsuits. No interviews. No hunger for money. Just gone. People who lie that boldly usually want something. She hadn't. That bothered him. So he did something he hadn't done in years. He stopped delegating. He pulled old files himself. Bank transfers. Shell companies. Names that shifted slightly from document to document, like shadows learning how to walk. And then a name surfaced. Daniel Mercer. Not the name Eleanor knew him by. Cedric stared at the screen for a long time, his pulse loud in his ears. Daniel didn't come from nowhere. He came from him. Years ago, before the empire stabilized, before Eleanor learned to smile at cruelty, Cedric had shut down a subsidiary quietly. Thousands lost jobs overnight. One lawsuit was buried. One settlement sealed. One family broke. Daniel's real surname was on that list. And as for Sabrina? She wasn't random. She was Daniel's cousin. Cedric leaned back in his chair, hands trembling not with rage, but with something colder. Intent. They hadn't wanted his money. They wanted his life dismantled piece by piece. They wanted him to go through the same pain they had gone through when his choices destroyed their family. And Eleanor. Eleanor had been collateral. Or worse. On the day of the wedding, Eleanor stood in front of the mirror as her wedding dress was adjusted, hands resting instinctively on her stomach. She told herself she was calm. She told herself she had chosen peace. But somewhere deep inside, something kept whispering, "This isn't finished." Daniel kissed her cheek. "You okay?" She nodded. "Just nerves." He smiled. "Once this is done, everything gets easier." She didn't know why, but the word "done" made her chest tighten. Cedric arrived a little too late at the venue without announcement. No security team. No tailored arrogance. Just a man in a worn suit carrying too much truth and nowhere to put it. The ceremony had already begun. Eleanor was standing at the altar with Daniel when Cedric intruded. Her eyes met his, and for a fraction of a second, the world narrowed between the two of them. He looked different. Smaller. Not broken, but stripped. Her heart stumbled. Daniel followed her gaze. His smile faltered. "No," he muttered. The officiant paused. Guests turned. Cedric's voice didn't shake. "Eleanor," he said quietly. "I need 5 minutes. If I'm wrong, I'll leave and never come back." Daniel stepped forward sharply. "This is inappropriate." Cedric didn't look at him. "His name isn't Daniel Mercer." A murmur rippled through the room. Cedric finally met Daniel's eyes. "It's Daniel Hale." And the woman who lied about being pregnant with my child is your cousin. Silence fell like something breaking. Eleanor's breath caught. What are you talking about? Cedric held out a folder. Not dramatic, not thrown. Offered. Because you deserved truth from me once, he said. Even if you never forgive me for how late it came. Daniel laughed nervously. This is insane. Cedric's voice hardened. Tell them why you changed your name. Tell them why you applied for that cafe job 2 weeks after Eleanor left my house. Daniel lunged for the folder. Security moved. Everything unraveled at once. The officiant stepped back. Guests whispered. Eleanor's hands trembled as she opened the folder herself. Dates. Names. Connections. Intent. She looked up at Daniel, her voice barely audible. Is this true? Daniel's silence was answer enough. She took a step back, not toward Cedric. Away from both of them. I need air, she said. Outside, Eleanor finally broke. I trusted you, she said to Daniel. I trusted both of you at different times. And you both failed me. Cedric swallowed. I know. Daniel scoffed. You think he's a hero now? Eleanor turned. Leave, she said through gritted teeth. Daniel hesitated. I said leave, she said again, louder this time. He did. Eleanor faced Cedric, tears streaking freely now. You don't get to interrupt my life and call it love, she said. You broke me once. Cedric nodded. I know. I'm not asking you to come back. She stared at him. Then why are you here? Because you were built on lies that started with me, he said softly. And because even if you never choose me again, I couldn't let you stand on an altar that wasn't real. Her breath hitched. And the baby, she whispered. Cedric's eyes flicked instinctively to her stomach. Then back to her face. I don't know anything you haven't chosen to tell me, he said. And I won't demand it. That, more than anything, undid her. She didn't go back inside. The wedding ended without vows. Without closure. Without answers. And Eleanor went home alone. Forgiveness didn't come that night. Or the next. Or the one after. Cedric didn't chase her. He wrote letters he never sent. He started therapy. He resigned from boards that didn't deserve him anymore. He learned how to sit with silence instead of filling it with control. Months later, Eleanor knocked on his door. Not for love. For truth. And finally, the secret she'd carried alone was spoken out loud. But that comes next. He didn't open the door right away. Cedric heard the knock and stood there, one hand braced against the wall, breathing like he'd just run a mile. He hadn't seen Eleanor in months. Not since the wedding that never happened. Not since the silence that followed, the kind of silence that isn't absence, but decision. When he finally opened the door, she was standing there with no makeup, no armor, one hand resting unconsciously on her stomach. I'm not here to forgive you, she said before he could speak. So don't look at me like that. He stepped aside without argument. Come in. The apartment was modest. Intentionally so. No art meant to impress. No staff. Just a man who had learned, too late, the cost of excess. Eleanor took it in quietly. You really walked away from everything. I walked away from what I used to hide behind, he said. There's a difference. She didn't respond. She sat, hands folded, eyes fixed on the floor for a long moment. I need to tell you something, she said finally. And I need you to listen without interrupting. Without trying to fix it. Can you do that? Yes, he said immediately. Then softer. I can. She inhaled slowly. The last time we slept together, it was after the board dinner. The one where your mother humiliated me. You remember. He nodded. He remembered the way she'd cried into his chest that night. The way he'd promised things he didn't protect. I found out I was pregnant 2 weeks later, she continued. I didn't tell you. His chest tightened, but he stayed silent. Because that same week, I overheard your mother making arrangements. Lawyers. Trusts. Language about temporary maternal custody. Her voice trembled. They weren't planning to let me raise my own child. Cedric's hands curled into fists. So I stayed quiet. I lost the baby a few weeks later. She swallowed. Or so I thought. Cedric looked up sharply, but didn't speak. I didn't know until after the divorce. The doctor said the initial diagnosis was wrong. I was still pregnant. I was just alone by then. The room felt smaller. And Daniel? Cedric asked carefully. I met him when I was already pregnant, Eleanor said. I didn't know who he really was. He figured it out eventually. He offered safety. A name. A future that didn't involve your family. She finally looked at Cedric, eyes burning. I didn't choose him because I loved him, she said. I chose him because I was afraid and I somehow felt safe being around him. Cedric closed his eyes. And the baby, she whispered, is yours. The words didn't explode. They settled. Heavy. Sacred. He didn't touch her. Didn't move. Why tell me now? He asked, voice rough. Because I needed to see if you could hear the truth without trying to own it, she said. Because I needed to know if you've changed or if you just lost. He nodded slowly. You don't owe me anything, he said. Not forgiveness. Not access. Not even trust. She studied him. And the child. I'll be whatever you allow me to be, he said. Nothing more. That answer hurt. And healed. Forgiveness didn't arrive as a moment. It arrived as effort. Cedric went to every appointment Eleanor allowed him to, sat quietly, asked permission before every question. He let lawyers draw boundaries that protected her, not him. When his mother demanded access, he said no. When the press sniffed around, he shut them out. When Eleanor pulled away, he didn't chase. When she cried, he stayed. One night, exhausted and overwhelmed, Eleanor snapped, Do you know how many nights I begged you to choose me? Cedric didn't defend himself. I know, he said. And I will spend the rest of my life knowing. The day their child was born, Eleanor didn't look at him for permission. She reached for his hand on her own. That was when he knew. Not that he'd won, but that he'd been allowed back into something fragile. Something real. Years later, when people asked Eleanor how she could go back to the man who broke her, she answered simply. He didn't come back asking to be loved. He came back willing to be changed. If you're still here, if this story held you when you needed it, take a second now. Like the video. Share. Tell us where you're watching from in the comments and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. Because some love stories don't end at the altar. They begin after everything burns and someone chooses to rebuild honestly. And sometimes, the greatest inheritance isn't an heir. It's becoming worthy of the love you almost lost. Until next time, this is Soul Storyverse TV.